Greetings, friends. Having a tavern chat tonight here on From the Tomes. See what kind of attendance we get. It's the first week back after 2 or 3 weeks that I haven't done this due to travel, which was rewarding and exciting. Hey, there's Wolfie. How's it going? So, give the usual. You're watching From the Tomes on Twitch. If you are not watching it on Twitch but on YouTube, go ahead over to Twitch and subscribe and get in on these fun chats like we have on Wednesday nights, or my streamed work time where I work on my game, Tales of the Harrowed Land, and other games, Call of Cthulhu, Dungeons and Dragons, etc. And if you are watching this on Twitch, feel free to go over and jump on YouTube. We have some original content for YouTube there and coming soon. foxandboardgames.com is the landing page. Fox and Board Games at Twitter and Facebook. And thanks for liking, subscribing, supporting, following, all those things, because that's what has made this possible for me to continue, is more than just a, every now and then whenever I get around to it, that incorporated into my game development process. And it's been fun to connect with other people and other gamers and people interested in talking about such things. I expect tonight might be a little quiet, considering it's the first trip back, first stream back from being away. So we're talking about the buy-in. There we go. Have a nice little tavern scene for us to ubiquitous tavern in which many adventures begin. As you saw, I was very well prepared for that. I just kind of at the last minute thought, I should have a tavern picture in the back. So I put a tavern picture in the back. So yeah, got a couple people watching. Feel free to say hi or just lurk. Maybe see if we get a few more viewers on tonight. I know a couple people were interested. In the meantime, I'm going to pop open a document here in the background that I've been working on for this week's in-person play of Tales of the Harrowed Land, one of the first run-throughs of the game in this incarnation, with a lot of the additional rules that I've put into the game and revised, and completely new gift systems for combat and character augmentation. So we'll see how it works. So we have something going on there in the background regarding that. So I think I'll just start my usual chattering, and then maybe as people log on and jump in, we'll get some additional conversation. So the topic of the buy-in is an interesting one. It's really about player motivation, right? And character motivation. I think that's what the buy-in really denotes, really connotates. What is the buy-in? What's the mechanism by which players / characters, and I say that very tongue-in-cheek, because I already had a little bit of a conversation with Wendell Burke yesterday while I was streaming, and we were talking about this. Oftentimes, for as much as people will say, well, my character wouldn't do this, sometimes that's very accurate, but sometimes what they're really saying is, I as a player am not as interested in this. I'm not as motivated to get involved in this as I might be otherwise. And it's a very tough point of division. to draw, right? Very tough line to draw. At what point is it that you are attempting to motivate characters and involve characters in a story based on what they would be interested in, the characters would be motivated in, versus are you in a contest against players who may not necessarily be as engaged. So I think that's kind of a strange interwoven but distinct situation that you have to deal with. I'm not quite sure how easy it is sometimes to if you really know. This goes back to, I think, a lot of what we've talked about in terms of player expectation in a game master expectation in players, touching back a little bit on this idea of problem players who are difficult just for the sake of being difficult. At what point, when a person sits down at a game table, is it their, I don't want to say responsibility because we're really talking about playing a game, but is it kind of in the contract of the gaming table of the RPG and the TTRPG world that when you're sitting down, you're there to play the game? So let's see. Wolfie, there are many ways to do it, but this goes back to why some character background is a good thing from a few weeks ago. Yeah, it allows the GM to tailor hooks or multiple characters to get in the group. So yeah, I'll joke around and I'll say exactly what I say at almost every one of these chats is it all kind of boils down to your session zero, right? It all kind of boils down to the dynamic that's been set up and is going to be set up within that particular game. And this came into play twice. So while I was away, I did not, as I mentioned before I left, I did not spend a lot of time with the world building. I didn't work on rules. I just really hammered out ideas for some scenarios to run in various venues, both online and in person, for Tales of the Hard Land, for other games. And twice I kind of hit this situation where I was thinking, well, all right, so my group of players that I play with all the time will definitely be there, and they're going to see this as the hook, and they're going to jump in on the hook because they're the player characters and they want to be involved in the story. They want to see what mystery I have. But like if I sat down with a totally cold group where we had just made characters or I handed them characters, I guess if you hand them characters, the character motivation is built in. But with totally cold group, like what's to say at this point they're not going to say, well, why would we even get involved in this? Right? Like this is nuts. Why would we get involved in this situation? This especially comes into play in horror games, right? Every horror story, whether it's a movie, a book, an RPG, comes to people making the protagonist makes counterintuitive decisions to remain in the house with the serial killer with the chainsaw, or to walk through the glimmering gate that you're sure goes to some otherworldly horror, right? Like no one in their right mind in that situation in real life is going to behave this way. So it's in horror, it's a weird buy-in dynamic. In Call of Cthulhu especially, the whole joke is, your character's going to die or go insane. So why are we even starting this? And I have gotten that a few times, but I think going through a particular genre game, such as Cthulhu or some of the other horror games, I think the expectation is already there as to what's going to happen. I think anybody who goes into Cthulhu and then says, "Well, my character wouldn't do that because they don't want to get hurt," I'm like, you might be playing the wrong game, right? I mean, that's really the reality. But when it comes to fantasy games, it's a different thing. It's a different setup. It's a different dynamic. It's, especially in a long-term campaign. As Wolfie said, if you have character backgrounds, either that you've been establishing through play or that you do sit down and and right up in terms of a backstory, going back to nobody cares about your backstory. And again, as we say, as the joke of that chat was, of course, that's not at all true. Like, that's any game master, even if you can't address all aspects. Well, so that's kind of where I want to have these discussions, right? So my group is super easy. They're like, here's a gold piece. Go investigate that lich haunted castle. Okay, let's go, because they just want to play the game. They just want to be involved. And and yeah, and the guys that I've been playing with now I play with them online, but all of them I've played with in person at one time or another over the past 30 years. We're all there to play the game. Yeah, none of us are gonna say, "Oh, no, we're not gonna do that." My character won't do that. We joke around about it all the time. Like, "Oh, my character's not gonna go there." Just to bust whoever's GMing at the time and annoy them. But it's yeah, and I'm generally the person who I come into the game and I'm there to play the game, and I have loose motivations for my characters, but I pretty much know I'm going to go along with the adventure. But at what point is it also the responsibility of the player to say, well, you're just giving me stuff to do. It's like playing an MMO. Go kill 40 boars or whatever, right? I mean, obviously, I'm sure the game master's plan is more sophisticated and complex and thought out than that. But at what point is it also the player's responsibility to say, yeah, no, I don't think so? I mean, I have been in cases, I don't really pull that often, but there have been a few cases where Vampire in particular is a game I'm thinking of, where it's so about character motivation and the characters are so survivalist oriented. You can't expect this guy playing this 800-year-old vampire who was a knight and then a lord and has his own domain and agenda to just pick up and run off and chase a quest out of totally out of their safety zone, out of their domain, just because the game master plops it down, right? And I think it's almost irresponsible if, as a game master, you just assume the players are always going to have a buy-in. They're going to create their own buy-in. And again, like you, and like your group. Well, so we have had that situation. I had players do it to me, and I've talked about this in a recent Cthulhu game, and we did it during our Warhammer game where we just felt like it wasn't that we weren't interested in the story or the world or the characters. We just had no clue like where this was going. So after the game one night, I did just say, with the rest of the group, and I said to the game master, I said, if you want to talk about this, privately, we can. He said, no, ask me. I said, well, where are we in this? Like, are we missing something? So I think that's a clarification issue. And once it was clarified as to where we were in terms of the dynamic of the story and what the expectation was on us as players, then we sailed through it and we enjoyed it. But I'm thinking more of the game master has the quest set up. The DM has the quest set up, no matter what system, what world. And you have one person or maybe more than one person who just says, yeah, no, I don't think I want to do that. And I think if you're spending, it's a weird like balance, because like the game master may have already spent 30 hours of their life creating the scenario. But it's not really your responsibility as a player to spend 20 hours of your life playing it through a setup that you aren't really that into. But I think sometimes there needs to be this differentiation between like you as the player or the players are not into it versus the characters really wouldn't be involved. I try my best to step into my character's mindset when we're gaming. But I do also keep in mind it is a game and I'm there to have fun. But like I said, there are a few things recently I can think of. A Vampire was one of them, but there's been a couple other situations where even just as a character, I said my character would in no way, shape, or form just go along with this. Like there's no reason, especially if it's a character that I'm going to be playing in a long term, self motivated fashion. I mean, D&D is kind of a different thing, I think, for a lot of people, where there's this thought, okay, we're playing D&D, we're going to go attack the ogre layer, and that's what we're here to do, and we'll take our 20 gold to do it, or whatever. But a lot of the newer games, which are very story and character centric, now I think this also speaks a little bit to what we've discussed in terms of um, some of the newer games, which are narrative focused, in which the players have a lot of agency in developing the story and developing the world, and where their input initially helps create it. I think that's the kind of game where it almost kind of eliminates this concept of the buy-in, because the players have already bought in through a mutual world building. That's where I think those games are actually really cool. And I think maybe that's one of the advantages to those games, that by, as my friend Neil says, offloading some of the world building to the players, they immediately have more of an investment in the situation in the world. So it's an interesting topic. I can think of a number of cases where, when running a game, even if the players were good sports and went along with the game and played through it, more than once somebody would say, well, why would we really be doing this? And I always think that's a really excellent question. And I think it's a really tough thing to dig into in terms of how to handle it as a game master. How to handle this concept of integrating the characters and the player interests. And again, I'm not positive the two are so diffused from each other. They're so divorced from each other. I think a lot of times, I mean, there are times when somebody will absolutely take this firm hold and say my character, for whatever reason, whether it's for narrative reasons. Yeah, I guess it's a lot about the group itself and the dynamic of the group. And again, I can think of a few pretty distinct examples in my own experience where I had a player completely adamant their character would not take a course of action, which was in effect necessary to complete a story. Um, and I think that goes back to a little bit of what we've talked about in terms of defining the problem player. Like, are they holding up play for everybody else simply because their character wouldn't do this? And then at what point is it the responsibility of the game master to try to make sure that there is a motivation for all the characters to want to do it? And how much of the responsibility is that of the game master versus how much is that on the players? And obviously, I don't have a clear-cut answer. We wouldn't be discussing this if I felt I had a clear-cut answer, right? I mean, that's what I always joke about, that I tend to throw these things out there, and my views on them are much more ambiguous than they actually seem up front. I find it hard to believe, I've always tried to take the approach, if I don't feel my character has one angle of motivation in a story or in a setting, what's another angle of motivation that I can devise for my character? I try to make my characters multifaceted for that reason. Like, even in heroic fantasy games, I attempt to have some other motivation for the characters besides killing monsters and taking gold. Maybe they have an interest, maybe they're looking for something. And as you said earlier, Wolfie, this goes to what we talked about in terms of establishing some character backstory, or establishing through a session zero some kind of player and character interest. What can I dangle in front of that player or that character to keep them involved, keep them motivated? And it might vary widely within a group. Like I think I've mentioned here before, my current in-person play group is not loot oriented. They're not motivated in terms of, you know, we're going to go attack that keep to get the treasure. They don't care about that. They want a story out of it. So I think that's in some ways easier when you have a group that really just wants to experience a story and they trust enough that you've devised this story that is going to engage them and challenge them. They want to experience moving through this space. Well, and I think that's what I'm kind of getting at. Like, it's really easy for me to lay it all on the game master. Well, yeah, exactly. And so that's where it does kind of become a thing. Like, so the best vampire games are 2 to 4 people where everybody can get a lot of individual time too, right? I mean, that's where vampire really shines. Because by nature, this idea of a group of vampires hanging out, these predatory creatures who survive only through killing other things and through, not being killed themselves by other vampires or werewolves or whatever. The idea that they're all going to get together and go on a quest is kind of like, that's never going to happen. And to just throw it out there as a game master and say, oh yeah, this is how it's going. And Amber is the same way. And as I said, I've only played one game of Amber years ago, but it was very politically oriented, and this idea that we were all in this group and we're going to go on an adventure. I mean, that wasn't the scenario, but it would have been ludicrous to propose that. Whereas, there's the other side of this. The easiest way to do this is a team based play. Science fiction game. You're all part of an away team, or you're all part of a crew of a ship. Obviously, then there is this kind of built in device that you're using to keep people motivated, keep people interested. Same thing with an adventuring party. I mean, this idea of an adventuring party is kind of silly in a way. It's very artificial that, we're this group of, strange kind of superheroes. And I guess that's because they basically follows a superhero game mold or superhero mold. Like, oh yeah, we're this group of superheroes that are going to go solve problems together or defeat enemies together or whatever. And I think it's in that way that fantasy games, especially group fantasy games, tend to be the most successful. And I think they're successful because of that dynamic, because of setting up this almost this super group kind of dynamic. And I think that's why people have fun with them. But yet, I think if you go and then take a look at Elric or the Stormbringer game, or Elric, whichever variation you have, the idea that you're going to get a bunch of Mellow together to go, on an adventure is like, they're most certainly going to kill each other before the end of the first 2 hours, or somebody will kill somebody. It's kind of, it's such a different game in terms of a fantasy game. But then that begs the question, if there's no buy-in and there's this kind of stressful tension between the characters, like, is that the game? Oh, so I'm getting some lag. Is that the game that you definitely want that group to be playing? I've seen a couple people bounce on and off, so I'm wondering if there are some streaming connectivity issues. It says I'm connecting to chat. Perhaps the chat server's down. So if you're typing and it has not appeared, that's why. Try to refresh it. So we're gonna send a message. Gotta cheer my own channel. Okay, that's a new one. Chat's having issues. Well, I will keep talking. So hopefully, if anybody wants to or is going to chat, they'll hang out and we'll see if it refreshes. So yeah, it appears that actually I'm seeing people drop on and off. So there's some sort of connectivity issue. Well, I'll keep talking for a little bit, and we'll see if there's any rectification of it. But yeah, so this came up. This has not only come up for me in terms of games that I've run in the past, but as I said, the two game scenarios I'm actively working on now. One for Call of Cthulhu, one for the Tales of the Harrowed Land. The Tales of the Harrowed Land is a little easier, as at least during the session 0, I kind of carefully constructed or carefully outlined how the scenario is going to be constructed. So I think all the players have created characters that will have a natural interest and buy-in. And now, of course, part of my job has been to go back and take a look at the characters and work around, work in some things that I think will actually interest the characters and that the characters can be involved in. And I think this is different from character inclusivity. I think we've all been in a game or perhaps run a game where inadvertently somebody is completely useless or left out. And that's one of the most frustrating feelings. Welcome to the chat room. It's back. So I think this is a little different than character and player inclusivity. I think this is about an initial engagement. And I think it's about a willingness of people to get involved and participate in this group environment. And just like everything else we talk about, there's no real clear-cut answer. It radically depends on the players in the group, how the game master sets it up, the feel of the game itself. I mean, even Cyberpunk, I understand there's this idea of, you're basically part of this edge runners, these criminal, this underground group that is there to do something, thwart a corporation, commit crimes, steal data, whatever, liberate a subsector of society. I think with Cyberpunk there is this more of an option, but even the Cyberpunk games and Cyberpunk focused games I've always kind of looked at and thought, this is such a merciless, like, cutthroat setup and situation. This idea that everyone's going to get along and hang out and be friends and solve mysteries together or whatever, to me always seemed very artificial. I don't know if there's really a way to get around that in these games. And I think that artifice is just kind of a nature of this group dynamic that these games set up. But like I said, then I go back to this idea that if you as a player and you as a character really wouldn't be interested, I kind of wonder what you're doing sitting there in the first place. Why are you there if you've already decided that your character won't be interested in something? Well, I think that's also part of it, that a lot of what I'm talking about here is generally alleviated by being upfront about what everyone's interests are in the game. And this is part of what I'm dealing with in terms of setting up something. What am I about to leave this here? J Soundscape. Are you still there? Did it terminate? Did Nightbot terminate you? Oh no. Is Nightbot becoming HAL 2000? Let's see. It got rid of your little emojis. It said you're spamming symbols. I'm going to have to adjust Nightbot. I hope it didn't bump you off, Soundscape. Stop spamming symbols. Warning. That's funny. It bumped Wendell one night for something too. I forget what. Exclamation points or something. I'll have to go look at Nightbot settings and see if I can adjust that. So sorry about that, Justin. Hopefully you're not banned. I'll have to take a look later. I don't think so. It says you got a warning. But kind of as I said before, I think part of this is also about the GM, even with an established group, even with a session 0, what happens if there's just a particular scenario or a portion of a scenario that a player refuses to engage in and refuses to buy into. And I think that could be a separate issue than the buy-in. Then the game master, I think, has to step back and say what can be done to engage the group and engage the player. Like, what have I left out that is not drawing in these players, that is not making the players or a player feel engaged in this? And as we always say, I don't think it's clear cut. I don't think it's an easy answer. I'm going to take a look at Nightbot right now. I'm going to make sure you're not banned there, J Soundscape. Links disabled. I'm gonna disable excess symbol protection. Actually, I'm gonna disable most of these protections to avoid that again, because it's rather silly. I don't see you on a ban list. I'll put a couple of you on the regulars list too. So yeah, that's what I've got on that. Looks like it's a quiet night tonight, which is fine. As I said, I think people are just getting back in the swing of coming on since I was away for a couple weeks. I will, in fact, be doing more of these style discussions, I think, in the coming months, especially as now I definitely have this feeling to focus and buckle down and keep the momentum on this going. And that'll be back for a duration. I won't be having extended periods away over the next couple months. So hopefully we will have. I want to revisit a couple topics too, like the topic of culture. There was only a few people on that night, and then afterwards, people sent me, texts and private messages saying I had these ideas, but I didn't make it on. So I'm going to revisit that too. I think something you also said, Wolfie, that after a while, I think this should become less of a problem. If you know a group really intimately and you know the characters or the variations of the characters that people play, because I tend to find players, they'll sometimes really surprise you. Um, they come up with something different, but I find that certain players tend to play certain types of characters, maybe not the same class, but you kind of get a feel for this play style. Maybe that's the word I'm looking for. The play style of that player. And if you've been playing with these people for a while, it should become less difficult to cater to that play style. So I think this is less of a problem than when you're setting up a new group. However, like I said, I still have a few very vivid recollections of players getting to a certain point in a game of mine and just saying, well, there's literally no way that with the information presented. Yeah, obviously. And I think it's actually really important too when you're adding a new player. And that is something I have encountered, that a group has a very particular set of motivations and a play style, and then a new player comes in and they're looking for something different and they're looking to be motivated by something different. And if they're not, they're not, you know. I'm still marveled at Nightbot terminating J Soundscape, the dictatorial robot. It's hilarious. I'll have to go through and make sure he wasn't banned. Send him a message. Pull up some other stuff to talk about. Maybe some of the stuff I'm working on, since it looks like we're topically thin tonight. Yes, Nightbot kicked him out. So I don't want my robot. I don't want my robot eliminating my regular viewers. That's really goofy. I was away for 2 weeks, and it's possible that the software itself updated. I'll pop this open. I was working on this earlier this week. Yeah, I'll continue on for a bit. If other folks pop in and want to chat, and that works too. Thanks for hanging out, Wolfie. You got any things going on with gaming? Anything fun or interesting to share? Oh, this goes on. Acres on. We're struggling. J Soundscape got banned by Nightbot. It was hilarious. Well, we talked about session 0. We talked about session 0 a bit and how important that is. A Star Wars game? Yeah, Curzon's going to continue his Star Wars game that we play with him. So I think these are all. Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's a lot easier, and this is something that Wolfie and I were just talking about. It's a lot easier to do this with a group where you have this established character history, where you have either you go through the level 0 or a session or a pre-game introduction or flashback adventures. And I think these are all really valid. And I think it's a way to curtail people saying, my character's not interested in this. But like kind of the crux of the discussion that I proposed to start off was, at what point is it the responsibility of the players to play, the players that are going to sit down to play a game to find or have a reason to feel involved or be involved, and counterbalance that to how much is the responsibility is on the game master and on the storyteller to make sure that there's something to motivate everybody. So I think it's definitely that kind of, we talked a little bit about, that's always this balance. It's always this double-edged sword. It's always this discussion of setting up expectations early on. And as we both said, like, you play with a set group for long enough, and you rarely run into this with frequency. You usually by that time have a pretty good idea of what's going to keep people interested. And I talked about this, the reality is that certain games really lend to this. Adventuring parties. Very, very rarely is a member of a D&D adventuring party, especially one that's been playing together for a while. And, the motivation is always in D&D this kind of transparent but ubiquitous, well, if I do this, it will help me level my character. Right? Like it's kind of difficult in D&D to ever say, no, I'm not going to do this. Well, okay, then your character won't progress. That's just the dark reality of it. At the same time, if you're in a game that's really character centric, maybe they will. Maybe they will say, my elf really wouldn't go along with this and help these poor orcs who are being downtrodden and want to become civilized. You know, like at that point, at what point can you? I'm thinking a little bit of the goblin situation in Blake's game, where the ranger whose favorite enemy was goblin. I mean, she wasn't going to let the goblin walk away alive, right? Now, guaranteed that wasn't a buy-in situation, but that was, you couldn't expect that character to behave so far outside of their character makeup. Just to have the adventure go a certain way. Also, like, when does the buy-in stop, right? And the situations I'm thinking of, rarely have I ever had a person say, "I'm not going to go on. I'm not going to start this game." But it's happened more often when they get to a certain point in the story that they say, "Well, my character wouldn't follow this course of action." I mean, then what's the responsibility? The responsibility, I think, is then on the game master to make sure there's a reason for it. Make sure there's a reason or a motivation in place. Just got your message there, Wolfie. Yeah, it's a bit of a chaos night. People are getting banned. Chat's going down. It's all right. It happens. But it's interesting. So twice now we've brought up this idea of backstory, helping to motivate the character, and I agree to a certain extent. But how much of each scenario could be tailored to every character's motivation and backstory? And that's where I kind of step back as a game master. And I've brought this up several times, especially when I was running a group of 6 to 7 people. This idea that somebody, and nobody ever did with that group, but that somebody in the group could say, "Nah, nah, because of this in my history, my character would definitely not be into this adventure." Well, I got 6 other people here. I don't know what to tell you, and that's the one situation years ago that I did run into this situation that sticks in my mind. I I kind of took the player aside and said, "Well, you're going to be sitting in the corner for the rest of the night because I have 4 other players here who want to continue with this adventure. So if you take your character out of this because your character's not interested, there's nothing I can really do about it." So at that point, was it a buy-in? Was it a difficult player discussion? Again, that's one of those kind of gray areas that I leave up to situational jurisdiction. So we talked a little bit about that. So I brought up, Wolfie brought that up, and I brought that up. Um, I discussed that a little bit in terms of knowing where you're at in a game. And I brought up the Warhammer game. That my issue was, it wasn't that I didn't want to play or I couldn't finish it. I didn't even know where we were at in terms of how are our characters positioned against this plot line. And that's why I just said at the end of the one game session, so, okay, where are we? And it wasn't even a buy-in issue with me. And it wasn't like, oh, this sucks, I don't want to play anymore. It was, I really didn't know how to go forward. And that's pretty rare for me as a player. And as I said, I've seen it happen a few times in games I've run. And in almost every case, it's because I've miscommunicated to the players. Except in a few cases where the players have chosen some path of difficulty. But it's true. And there are plenty of TV shows, especially in the last number of years, that I got to a certain point where I just said, I just can't watch this anymore. You know, even if I followed it for 5 years or whatever. Walking Dead was a good example. That, you know, especially Fear the Walking Dead just got so ludicrous at some point. So unbelievable even for a zombie apocalypse. And even the original Walking Dead, I just kind of got to the point with it where I was like, all right, even in the realm of the zombie apocalypse, I'm just not buying some of this, you know? And I kind of tuned out, and I followed it for several years. Trying to think of any others recently. Movies, yeah. Well, right, and it's definitely. I know all of us probably as game masters, self included, sometimes think we've communicated much more effectively than what we have, or our ideas are much clearer and our expectations are much clearer. And as I've said, if I have any flaw as a game master, sometimes it's been making things too big and expecting players to dig into it and follow through, and then realizing it's not that they don't want to do it; it's because they literally just don't know even where I'm at in terms of the story. I've rarely had a game that I've gotten halfway through or gotten to a point in and literally lost interest. I haven't really had that experience as a player. I've had games where I get to a point where I think my character really won't do this. There's no logical reason for the characters or my character or whatever to continue on this path. It just doesn't seem feasible, like anything we would ever feasibly do. And I think that's when you kind of make that decision, you know, are we gonna just break from this level of believability and say, okay, we wouldn't being cat bombed from behind. I've got a new chair. I'm not sure what I think of it yet. It's a kneeler. It's supposed to help with sciatic back issues, but I'm not sure. I don't think it's particularly comfortable. And I can't be cat bombed. Cats can't sit on my lap while I'm while I'm while I'm talking in this chair. It was disappointing. I'll come up with some other solution. Um, but yeah, and then I've always thought, well, can I come up with a different way for my character to remain engaged or remain interested in this environment? Especially if it's something that we've stuck with for quite a long time. But as I've said, is that necessarily always the player responsibility? Or is it always the GM responsibility? I can say that I did have one or two games, usually due to a game master who was not experienced at the time. Yeah, where there was a lack of preparation and they were kind of making it up as it went along, and it wasn't even so much in my case as a buy-in or interest issue. It's that clearly this game master just didn't plan anything. I had no idea where anything was going, and we kind of just stopped the game, and I kind of just tuned out. And it was like, and part of it was they were very inexperienced. They saw other people doing it and thought, oh, we can just make it up as we go along. Well, right, and that's kind of what I'm talking about. Like there's a point in almost every adventure where any characters, any sane being, hero or not, is going to get to a point and say, okay, no, I think we're good. I think we've had enough. There's Nightbot again. See if it bans anybody else tonight. Um, I and again, I always hate to go back to that, but it's still a game and you're there to play it because yeah, you kind of get to that point where sometimes you just go, yeah, no, I don't know why we're even doing this, why we're finishing this, why we're completing it. So And also, I think that speaks a lot to how a campaign's written. Like, you're probably not the only group to do that. I'm going to say you're definitely not the only group to do that. I'm sure other groups got to that same point. It got to a point where just like, yeah, no, okay, this is where our characters are. I think that's okay. I think if as a group, characters and players make the decision that the characters are at a terminal point in that scenario, I think it's perfectly acceptable, no matter how much the game master wants to continue it, for the players to say, well, okay, these characters are done with that part of the story. And that's kind of how I feel about the current D&D game, where that if we pick the D&D game back up, I think it's going to be very different. And I think I'm going to just really kind of sit down with everybody and say, okay, well, where do you see, do you see your characters continuing on? Do you want to bring in different characters? Do you want to change the scenery? Do you want to change the storyline? And I think that's all fully acceptable. But again, that goes back to what we've been saying since the first minute that this chat started, when Wolfie said, but the communication between the players and the game master is like the most important part of the buy-in. And I agree. And even the couple situations I'm thinking of where I didn't have a buy-in, it was clearly because the player wanted something else. And something else the game couldn't provide. My game couldn't provide. And whether that was something that was personal on their part, something that was character truly motivated, I think is irrelevant. But the reality is that one of us did not communicate to the other, or we both didn't communicate to the other what the expectation was in the game. So with that, I think we're gonna wind down. A little bit quiet chat tonight. I think that's okay. Intimate. We'll call an intimate chat experience. Intimate live stream experience. Like I said, I had a few other people come on, and I know Justin got bumped off by Nightbot. I suddenly have that feeling of maybe this thing is in control. It's not. I just turned off its filters, but it's never filtered them for emojis before, and he always starts by posting emojis. So, and I saw a couple of people come on and then bounced right off. So, again, I don't know. But anyway, interesting thought, interesting topic. Yeah, we'll be back next week, and we'll probably be gearing things back up and re-engaging a little bit over the next couple weeks. I'm back on the schedule, and I'll be here, and I'll be increasing my schedule too. And as I said, I'm even thinking about another afternoon or evening discussion chat like this. So like I had a couple of people come on yesterday during the day who said, yeah, I just can't make Wednesday nights. And that's fully acceptable. So got some other exciting news coming down the pike for the game stuff. But I want to, everything is solidified before I talk about it. So with that teaser, thank you very much, Wolfie, Curzon, for chatting, and everybody else who's popped in and lurked. Special thanks to Justin for being my first inadvertently booted, robotically terminated viewer. And ironically, he's like, here all the time at the house and is playing this Sunday. So it's just funny he's the one that got booted. It's not like some of you came on and just said something ridiculous or started spamming. It's a regular player. All right. Do the usual outro. Thanks again for tuning in. Twitch, on YouTube, Fox and Board Games, Twitch TV from the Tomes, foxandboardgames.com, Fox and Board Games on Twitter and Facebook. Like, subscribe, follow. Thanks for supporting. Thanks for watching. If you're watching this after the fact, thanks for watching it after the fact. I get a lot of views. Yeah, see you later, Curzon. Thanks for coming on. I get a lot of views after in the days subsequent. And as I said, I think things will be gearing up in the next couple weeks as I get back to it. So, see y'all later. Have a good night.